Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And today I'm going to present a strong data point that supports my supposition that Dungeon Pastor games and Relic Runner games are a waste of time for talented fantasy TRPG game leads. It is not where they should be spending their time. And the reason why is if you go down this road and you run these Dungeon Pastor type games and these Relic Runner type games, what's going to end up happening is you will end up playing with your old friends who are old, and your game is literally going to die because the people you're playing with will die, right? Like relatively soon, right? And so basically I'm like, stay on 5e, stay on the platform where your game will actually matter, right? It's really important, because if you spend time on these Dungeon Pastor games and these Relic Runner games, you're going to end up, just playing the game with the same old people you're playing with in the 80s, right? Now, I say this to you all the time, right? But today, I'm going to point you to a Relic Runner who is proving what I'm saying and giving you hard data like that what I'm saying is absolutely true. Okay, so let me define my terms. So what is a Dungeon Pastor? A Dungeon Pastor, in my humble opinion, is someone who so basically, in my humble opinion, a Dungeon Master is someone who runs Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as their primary game. A Dungeon Pastor is someone who cares more about the past of Dungeons & Dragons than who cares about the future of Dungeons & Dragons. They specifically play Dungeons & Dragons 1E, 2E, Moldvay, Holmes, and Beckme and BX, right? They essentially play pre-1985 Dungeons & Dragons editions, okay? Now, a Relic Runner is someone who runs third-party copies of what Dungeon Pastors run, okay? Examples of that would be Old School Essentials, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Lamentation of the Flame Princess, that kind of thing, okay? All right, now, let's talk about the right way to roleplay with DM James, and we're going to talk about DM James today. So I watch his channel because I think he is a template. I think he's a proxy for tens of thousands, probably. I think he's a proxy for about 400,000 Dungeon Pastors and Relic Runners. He is specifically a Relic Runner. He runs, as his primary game, third-party copies of the games that Dungeon Pastors play, okay? But the reason why I think he's so important is I think there's just a ton of people that are very, very similar to him, like 90% lock copy of him, right? So I think what's happening in his game is happening in probably close to 500,000 Grognard's games, right? And of course, there'll be some variation, but at the macro level, it's the same pattern, okay? So let's talk about what DM James just said. So first of all, I owe a huge thank you to DM James for making this video. And he did a state of his game, and he talked about what's been happening in his game for 2 years. Now, and he was incredibly transparent and honest, and I'm really, really thankful, right? And also, I also am very aware, like, transparency is punished, not rewarded, right? Like, because he's essentially giving me the arrows to drop the goblin, right? Like, his point is the goblin, he's handing me the arrows to drop it in the dirt, right? Like, and the only way we get there is through transparency. But one thing I love about DM James, he's a smart guy, okay? Is one thing I really, really like about him is he's transparent. And I think the reason why he's transparent is he understands transparency is compelling content. And also, if you're going to give people advice, you darn well better tell them how that advice is working at your table, right? And you need to be honest when it's not. And he's doing exactly that. So I owe DM James a huge thank you. And I'm saying thank you, DM James, for being honest about your play, because it's an amazing window into what I think is about 400,000 Dungeon Pastors and Relic Runners, okay? So here we go. All right. Unbelievable, right? So what has his last 2 years been like, right? Well, he told us. First, he was running Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Then he went to Dungeon Crawl Classics. Then he went to Old School Essentials, okay? And I actually have then he went to Star Wars West End games, okay? Then he went back to old school essentials. Then he went to Cyberpunk Red, right? Then he went to Against the Dark Master, and then he went to Adventurer Conqueror King. 7 campaigns in 2 years. That means that not a single one on average lasted even 4 months, right? Now, why on earth? Oh, and this is the kicker. He told us this, right? Which is shocking. Like 7 campaigns in 2 years. I'm beating that. Like, people just gave me a lot of flack for, like, you know, my game going sideways after 28 sessions. By the way, we have every player back at the table now. All the core starters from the originals are back now, and we're continuing on a different campaign, right? But just want to let you know that, right? So we're definitely, you know, I had an 11-month campaign and an 8-month campaign in the last 2 years, right? So, like, that's way better than 7 campaigns, you know. And the reason why is I'm on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and it attracts new players. This is amazing. Listen to what DM James said. He said, I'm very sad about this fact. And then he stated the fact. He said, all my new players are gone, and all that is left are the old players who are my old friends who are old, right? And then he went on to say that some of his players are literally in the hospital with serious, like, health conditions, not because they're unhealthy in any way, but just because they're old. Like, it's very common to be in the hospital when you're old, right? And this is directly impacting his campaign and making it very hard to keep his table together and excited for campaigns. And even more than that, right? He just drug, and he admitted it. He drug his players to Adventurer Conquer King. They did not want to play. They told him flat out, we don't want to play Adventurers Conquer King. He cajoled them to read it, and once they read the game, then they're like, okay, we're on board. But even with that, they still were like, why should we get excited about this? You have drug us through 7 different game systems. 7 different game systems in 2 years. Unbelievable, right? So I've been saying it for a good part of a year. If you are a talented fantasy tabletop role-playing game lead, right, do not get on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It is a platform that will give you new players, attract players, right? Not repel them, not shed them off like scales off of a dragon, right? Like, and that's what's happened. He had new players when, you know, because he was with 5th edition, and because he's a skilled fantasy tabletop role-playing game lead. But then as soon as he started dragging them through these old vibe, you know, Dungeon Pastor, Dungeon Relic games, versions of Dungeons & Dragons that came out before 1985, or third-party copies of Dungeons & Dragons editions that came out before 1985, he lost his new players, which is exactly what I've been telling you, right? And if you look at DM James, you're going to find he is bog standard Relic Runner, right? Bog standard Dungeon Pastor, right? Just won't, you know, just continues to go on and on about the glory days of Dungeons & Dragons in 1985. To me, it's super obvious. If you're planning your hopes and your dreams and all your inspiration in something that is like, that's 15, something that's 36 years from now, right? No modern players are going to be attracted to that, right? And all these Relic Runners and all these Dungeon Pastors assure me that that's wrong. But here's the data. Here's the evidence, right? And this guy, you know, like, I really appreciate his honesty, and I feel like the vast majority of Relic Runner games are, this is exactly what's happening, right? And the vast majority of Dungeon Pastors, this is exactly what happened. They keep old friends who are old gamers, who, frankly, did you even need, like, that? Just keeping your old friends playing, who are old, playing a game with you, is that hard? Is that something you needed to try to do? We're trying to grow Dungeons & Dragons. We're trying to grow the legacy of Gary Gygax. And it's never going to happen with these Dungeon Pastor games or with these Relic Runner games. Well, that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. I do have the link for DM James's video that gave his State of the Games. I thank you so much DM James, for this proof of what I've been saying for a year. And I know it's hard, like, I feel bad using your transparency to prove my point, but data is so hard to get, right? And I really appreciate your transparency. So thank you very much, DM James, for being honest about the state of your game. The way I've been being honest about the state of my game, much appreciated. Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.